Right, I think we'll get started here. So hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this presentation as we recognize April as Fair Housing Month. I'm Linda Arquette, CEO of the Kent Washington Association of Realtors. Joining me today is Suzanne Silva, Chief Executive Officer for the Greater Providence Board of Realtors and the Northern Rhode Island Board of Realtors. I believe Hannah is with us, Hannah Hodgson, Association Executive for the Newport County Board of Realtors. I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Lee Davenport. Dr. Lee is a published author, blogger, podcaster, and former managing broker for RE/MAX. Additionally, Inman has ranked her as one of the top 25 real estate coaches in the industry. Without further delay, let's hear Dr. Lee's perspective on embracing fair housing practices in your business. Dr. Lee?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm excited to join you today as we talk about really one of my favorite topics, and I'll get into why a little later. And hopefully by the end of our time today, you'll be able to say it's one of your favorites too, if you don't already feel that way. Well, I've got on the screen some of my information, and I'm happy to send out the slide deck afterwards. So don't feel like you have to write fast and furious or take 1,000 screenshots. I can be sure again to send this out. And as we're jumping into this, I want to encourage you to be what one of my coaching friends calls a nuggetologist. And what we mean by that in this context is typically, when we do classes, it sometimes feels like that fire hose feeling, right? Where information is just being thrown at you and you're just like, okay, that was good, but what? What do I do? So my goal is not to have you leave here thinking, oh my God, she gave me a laundry list of things to do. No, I want you to just look for one or two usable nuggets that perhaps you can even start to implement this week. So one or two nuggets, that's all. Don't get inundated with everything I'm going to discuss. And our journey today, we're going to start with how did our various communities across the nation. We are going to talk about very specific things in Rhode Island, but I want to give us a broader perspective so that we can see nationally what this has looked like. And also, I recognize a lot of times when I do these trainings, we are realtors not just in one state. Right? Many of us, we have licenses in some of the surrounding states. Why not? So again, I'm going to cover it from a national perspective as well as local, but we'll look at how did we get here? Then we're going to look at where are we today? And then where do we go from here? Now, let me say this again, I've already said be a nuggetologist. This is a part of a 6-hour CE class that I do. So I am condensing this down into an hour. I'm going to give you high points again from these 3 areas. So I don't want you to think, I wish we could get more information in this 1 hour. I am going to give you some resources at the end though, so that if you're like, I'm still curious about this part or that part, you'll be able to do a deeper dive. All right, gang. I'm sure most of you recognize this car, the DeLorean. This was in Back to the Future, just a classic movie. If you're not into these type of movies, no worries. If you are, then you just may remember seeing this. And back in the 80s, this was such a cool car. I know it looks kind of weird now, and you may have heard how they're bringing it back. But as I mentioned, we are going to start with how did our communities get here? So I always picture myself and picture us hopping into our DeLorean so we can go back before going forward. And let me just give you the reasoning behind why we're going back, because I get it. History is not everyone's favorite subject. It is one of mine in general. Like, I just love, anything related to history. But our industry is so special in that we understand the need for a historical framework, probably more than anybody else. So I've got on the screen a quick cartoon, and notice this picture. So you've got two gentlemen. One has almost like a Moses beard, and he's the home inspector. And notice the caption. It says, "You sure are a thorough inspector. You were clean shaven when you started." And I love this. And anyone that represents a buyer at any point, I'm sure you're like, cha-ching, this is the home inspector that I want to work with my clients, because this represents him being thorough. And we celebrate it, we welcome it. And honestly, in our industry, again, for most of us, when we are working with the buyer, we're not going to discourage them from having a home inspection or getting an appraisal or reading the seller's property disclosure or the lead-based paint disclosure or getting a clue report, depending on the area, right? This for our industry is very organic. Like, we understand the need to look at the history, not go into something blindly. So I want you to recognize that's the same thing we're doing here. We're just kind of, this is our seller's property report. We're looking at, again, how did we get here? How is it that we are in the state that we are today? And again, we'll look at where do we go from here. So here's a quick timeline to start us off. Yesterday, April 4th, was 54 years since Dr. King was assassinated. And some of you may know, but maybe you don't know, his assassination was really the crux of fair housing legislation, at least the 1968 version of it, coming to pass. President Johnson at the time, and I have the quote here in that left first column, he viewed the Fair Housing Act as a fitting memorial to Dr. King's life work, and he wanted that act to be passed prior to Dr. King's funeral here, right in Atlanta, where I am right now. And I bring this up because without studying history, sometimes it feels like, oh, fair housing is just the law of the land. That's absolutely what we should do. And that's a great perspective for us to have 54 years later. But before 1968, there was a lot of things that happened that took away from fair housing. We'll look at that closely in a minute, but let's keep going. Next, May 1968. So just a month later, after the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed, we get the Truth in Lending Act. That becomes law, yay. April 1969, so the following year, I loved that they had, and when I say they had a huge celebratory party. It makes me think of like the Oscars, right? So they are dressed up, or the Grammys, or whatever awards, or even the awards in our companies and our associations, right? Because this is literally award season. So they dressed up, they gave out awards for those that did fair housing and did it right. And honestly, this is going to be one of the things I talk about when we look at what do we do from here, because this is a tradition that we don't do. Really, we remember Fair Housing Month, but wow, if we went from the stick mentality, oh, you didn't do fair housing right, which is the stick, right? That motivation. And we go to the carrot, or I like to call it the carrot cake. I always like cake. But we go to this motivation of awarding people and identifying, hey, who's doing it right? Let's celebrate them. That is a game changer in our industry. So we'll look at all of that a little bit later. 1970s, so let's keep going on our timeline. In the 1970s, after, again, just tumultuous 1970s, we have some more laws that are passed. So we have, as I have on the screen, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We have the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act of 1975, which some of the data that I'm going to go through is because of that act. We have the Age Discrimination Act of 1975 kick in. 1980s, we have more initiatives that add, for example, handicap status, familial status as protected classes. We get Housing for Older Persons Act of 1955. So that's our 55 plus communities. And as I'm nearing 50, I am super excited to be in a 55 plus community, but that's another thing. But we have all of this because of this journey of fair housing that started, again, tragically with Dr. King's assassination. And when I say started, I don't mean the struggle, but the legislation of it, right? So something that I want you to notice, though, and this was actually a statement by President Kennedy, that rising tides lifts all ships, which I wholeheartedly believe. Now, context, though, that's not what he was not referring to fair housing, but I do think it relates and it applies, because here's what I quickly showed you, but again, we're going to go in a little more detail. Notice that at the top of our funnel, there was really a quest to end racial discrimination in housing. That's where it started. That led to federal fair housing legislation, unlike what we've had before, because it wasn't the first in 1968, but it was just a new era, right? And then from there, as I just mentioned, we have all of these other classes that get opportunities to now experience fair housing. So again, it's this all tides, or rising tides, it lifts all ships. That's beautiful. But let's go back, get some more context. Why did we have this struggle? Why did it take Dr. King's death for us to even see this modern era of fair housing legislation? So let's go back. I also want to play a little game. So I'm going to ask you all to chime in the chat. One of my favorite games has always been Jeopardy. And if you've never seen the show before, no big deal. Our goal is to present the answer, which is what I will do. I'm going to play host. And then you let me know what's the corresponding question. Now, because we're doing this by chat and it's not live, don't feel like you've got to type in chat in the form of a question, which is how this game is normally played, because I know that can get annoying and it's going to take too long. Just type your answers really quickly. And by the way, I have a prize at the end. So hopefully you all will participate. All right, so as I just mentioned, it's not a game when it comes to fair housing. And like I said, this is a 6-hour class into 1 hour. So I'm just going to go through a few instances where fair housing has been in jeopardy throughout the US. We're going to look at some things specifically in Rhode Island, but again, I want you to see that this wasn't an isolated incident, it was national. So we'll go through some of those things. And again, feel free to type in the chat. So the first thing, or first answer that we have, at the start of the 20th century, these racial demographics bought land and built beautiful homes in all sections of LA. This is particular to LA, free from restrictions. So this is around 1900. Any thoughts? Please type in the chat. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Any thoughts? John, Spanish. Okay, good. Yes. Any other thoughts? Because there are some more. There are some more. Lilium, Caucasian. Yes, absolutely. Kevin, yes. Let's add to more here. So you guys are on the board. You get points. So the question would be, who were the Black, Japanese, Mexican, and white American residents. So what we're seeing just 100 or so years ago, and I'm purposefully only going back to early 1900s, is to see that for the most part, we started last century off where housing could be, obtained. There was access and opportunity to housing by different groups, right? But we know things changed. And part of the reason why I'm not going to go back beyond 100 years, because I think it's very important to realize that a lot of the things that come up during the 1900s, these are things that happened actually in our lifetimes or in our parents' lifetimes. My grandmother, who has a big birthday coming up in the next few weeks, she's in her 90s and she was living through a lot of these things that occurred. My parents are alive, I'm alive, and these are things that we've all lived through in our lineage. So it's interesting that we don't have to go back hundreds of years. We can just stay within the time period that we've been living. So again, early 1900s, there's access and opportunity. So that's good. It starts off that way, but let's keep going. I see some other responses. Gold explorers, absolutely. Celebrities, funny. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, and before we do, I do want to mention with our Jeopardy game, I am going to give you the sources. So this is a source. This is a book that this came out of. Many of the sources I'm going to give are primary, so you're going to see newspaper clippings. The ones that are secondary often are not only credible, some of them have even been peer reviewed. So I want you to understand that this is historical data that's been verified. All right, next one. This is the year that the Portland Realty Board, so we're making our way across the states. The Realty Board adopted a rule declaring it unethical for any agent to sell property to either Negro or Chinese people in a white neighborhood. Any guesses on what year that might have been? Any guesses? And we are in the 1900s, by the way. Bill, 1910, good guess. Any other thoughts? Good, good. John, 1950, good guesses. Any more? 1960s, I see a few answers with that. Okay, it was 1919. So you all get points for weighing in. Thank you. 1919, so early 1900s, we see there's access, there's opportunity. And as early as 1919, we start to see restrictions cropping up. Here's one of those primary sources. So this was an article from that day. And of course, the phrases they're using to denote these groups, they're not appropriate. We don't use them today, but it does say realty men intend to stop. So again, that implies there were sales happening, but now to stop sales to Negroes, Orientals. And in this photo, we actually see people moving. And unfortunately, it wasn't just, as I'm saying, Portland Realtors, this was national. So even our association at the national level in 1924 codified this in the ethics handbook. Article 34 says, hey, a realtor should not be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character, property, or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood. And around that same time, we've got leaflets that identify what that looks like as far as detrimental, right? So a look at this leaflet from 1916 shows row houses. We've got X's over the homes where the Black people of that time were starting to move into. And there was a push to vote for segregation, to vote for exclusion, right? So things are starting to change though. So 1900 to 1916, 1919, we're seeing changes. What else? Also in the 1920s, we get our Realtor name and just who we are, our brand, trademarked. Now, unfortunately, which is great from a business marketing standpoint, but unfortunately, and this is from a history professor here in Georgia, it was to one of the primary causes, one of them was to exclude Black real estate professionals so that they would not be able to identify. So there was this professional exclusion. And this is a video from here in Georgia where our local association president, our current president, speaks with the Empire Board of REALTORS, which was the Black real estate association that started because we were being excluded out of the realtor organization as a whole. So watch this. This is really short, but take a look at this.
Like I said, there's just so many stories. I mean, the very first broker that I affiliated my license with, Mr. T.J. Locke from Apollo Associates Realty. I mean, he talks about the stories when he literally one time was running out and had his head busted from somebody throwing a rock at him just trying to show some real estate. You know, he actually was the second African-American to gain access to the multiple listing service after the lawsuit was won that the Empire Board actually had filed with the multiple listing service so that the person can have access to the real estate forms without being affiliated with the Realtor organization. He was the second African-American that had access to that. But I mean, just hearing some of those stories, the way that there's a Peyton Street bridge where you couldn't go past it and sell real estate if you're African-American, and Empire Board was instrumental in having that barricade and that bridge literally removed that allowed African-Americans to start selling real estate on that side of the town right here in Southwest Atlanta. And like I said, the stories just go on and on.
And they do. So again, I'm showing snippets from around the nation. Let's keep going. This is the year the Supreme Court validated racial deed restrictions, such as said property shall not be conveyed, sold, rented, or otherwise disposed of in whole or in part, or otherwise occupied by any person or persons except of white and Gentile race, except, however, a domestic servant actually employed by the lawful owner or occupant thereof. What's that year, gang? Talk to me. I'm checking the chat. What's that year? 1920s? Good, 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 good. Yes, let's go ahead and do the reveal for that. 1926. So again, I just want you to see that starting the year, the century, started the century off, access, opportunity, right? But it's changing as we get deeper into the 1920s. Let's do a few more history things, but then we're going to bring it current. I don't want you to, again, get bogged down in this history, although I find it fascinating. In 1927, this organization created a model clause or a template for deeds promoting more racial covenants. This organization finally apologized in 2020. Who was it? Any guesses? Yes, Bill. This is us. You know, I'm a realtor. It's us. We did. This is something that, again, our organization was a part of. And here are, I've got on the screen just some examples of how within really the last year or two, there has been concentrated efforts throughout the US. So in different states, people, homeowners of all races are saying, hey, why did I just buy a home and I see this clause in the, you know, for those that read through the deed and everything, they still see it, it's still there. And unfortunately, it does feel like a memorial of hate. So there have been these new initiatives to get them struck and removed so they're not being passed on every time someone gets a new home. And then even, this is April 4th. So just yesterday, Washington Supreme Court has said, hey, we want to remove them, but we want to remove them from the public as far as when you're buying the home, so you're not unfortunately traumatized, but we do still want to keep the record so that, again, it's more of a historical lesson to say this was an unfortunate part of what was allowed, although it's not today. So this is something that I commend, and I really say, as we do these classes throughout the nation, it's so important that if there isn't an initiative being done in your state, look into it. It's something worthwhile, because I know, I'll actually say for my family, my parents, when they purchased their current home back in the 1990s, we have that, we saw it. And even my dad, he brought it up to me a few weeks ago about how, it was just traumatic. It definitely hurts to see these exclusionary deeds and clauses. So that's just something to think about. Okay, one more thing. And again, this is our history, but we have definitely move beyond this, and there's still more things we can do. So ultimately, here's the answer. This is how realtor leadership saw fair housing prior to its 1968 federal legalization. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? I'm checking the comments, and I'm keeping score. I'm giving out points. And yes, thank you, John. I say whoa too. I say whoa too. And you know what, for sake of time, if you do write in the chat, that's fine, but I'm gonna keep moving. I'm gonna speed it up a little bit. Okay, it was called forced housing, unfortunately, by realtor leadership prior to the 1968 change. Not by every single one, but we were definitely the ones actively working against the implementation of fair housing. Here's some examples. So this is a newspaper clipping from December 4th, 1963. And this is, or was, the president of the California Realtor Association at that time. They've changed names just like NAR has, but it's still the same association. And I've got circled in pink, the president at that time says, hey, I don't call it fair housing law. I refer to it as forced housing. Also, we see here in Iowa how I've got highlighted in pink what this section in pink says. The second involves instances where the homeowner was willing to sell to a minority group member, but where his realtor, for reasons best known to himself, told the prospective buyer that the house was not available for sale to a member of a racial minority. And then here in this next clip, I want to show you an actual person from the 1960s.
I was in the Army at Fort Lee, Virginia, and my wife and I and my daughter had no problem at all in finding housing. As a matter of fact, we only had 2 tries. In the first one, we didn't really want the house, and the second one, we rented from this man, and it was an excellent opportunity. When I got out of the Army in October of this year, I came back with my wife to Warwick, Rhode Island. Warwick, Rhode Island was the area in which I grew up, went to school. I went to college in the state of Rhode Island actually, and from time to time I was always in contact with many friends in Warwick. And from there we started looking for housing. And to my surprise, to my really surprise, I found that there was no housing to be had. Here in Warwick, Rhode Island, where I grew up, went to school, played ball. I was student mayor, and many of the activities in school, I could not find an adequate place for my wife and family. And this is the disheartening thing that happened to me in Warwick, Rhode Island, where I couldn't either rent nor buy. from here, naturally, we tried other areas in the state of Rhode Island. And I found that in Pawtucket, I had no avail. And Cranston, I had no avail. In Providence, I still couldn't find a home. And some parts of East Providence was very bad in finding housing for my family. The disheartening thing, again, that occurs to me is the fact that many people were willing to rent to us. Many people, again, were willing to sell to us. However, they were disheartened or dissuaded, I would say, by the real estate agents who decided from some angle that they didn't want Negroes in this particular area or this particular section of town. And this is the thing that gets me mad, is that it's the real estate agents in many cases that are deciding where people should live.
So again, this is our history. One more video clip, and then we are going to get off the history and we're going to move to today. So here's another video clip from the 1960s, again, just showing some of why we needed fair housing law. Here we go.
Over the past 2 years, we've done a series of stories on wealth in America, including the role of race. The typical black family has only a fraction of the wealth of the typical white family. And many experts say that the root of that problem is real estate. In an earlier story, that brought me back to the county where my grandfather bought a house way back in 1953, an investment, by the way, that has skyrocketed in value. Well, this morning we are sharing another experience, that of a black family that had been hoping to make a similar purchase in the very same county. And what happened next?
And that's the end of a fairly busy day on the New York Stock Exchange.
1964 was a record-breaking boom year for the U.S. economy, and CBS followed along as one young couple tried to buy their piece of it.
His name is Corbett Rochelle. Since last July, he and his wife Sally have visited many real estate offices like this one.
The Rochelles knew exactly what they wanted, a 4-bedroom home in Bergen County, New Jersey, one of New York City's most desirable suburbs. And as it happens, the very same place where my grandfather had found a home just a decade earlier.
The Rochelle search began in the usual way with the local newspaper.
But as Corbett and Sally visited real estate offices and asked to see properties, they ran into a problem my grandfather did not.
I have to call him and tell him that you are colored.
As CBS documented in this rare hidden camera footage, the Rochelles were repeatedly turned away.
So what do you have that you can show me today?
Nothing in this price range. Nothing at all.
And in case there was any doubt about the exact nature of this problem, CBS cameras also documented what happened when white home buyers were sent in to ask about the very same properties.
Let's take a ride. I'll take you over to one we have in the development and show you that.
What the Rochelles experienced was a practice known as steering, a way of excluding black buyers from white neighborhoods. Prior to the Fair Housing Act of 1968, it wasn't only common, but legal, and very often life-changing. So to find out what happened to the Rochelles and how it compared to the experience of families like my own, we tracked down Corbett and Sally's only child, Alicia, only 11 at the time, and asked her to rewatch that original report.
Not wanted.
It wasn't always easy.
I've wondered often as I've gone from one real estate agency to the other, if people realize the many embarrassing situations and questions that you have to go through as a Negro, sometimes even humiliating.
Do you recognize that expression on your father's face?
Yeah, it's disgust. Yeah.
Did he ever find the house?
No. We moved out of New Jersey.
Your family spent at least 6 months and up to several years
Yeah, oh yeah.
with plenty of money looking to buy a home in Bergen County, New Jersey, and never did.
Nope. Nope, I sure didn't.
What that means is the Rochelles missed out on one of the biggest real estate booms in the country. Home prices in Bergen County have jumped as much as sixfold, even after correcting for inflation. For families like mine who were able to make the investment, that money has helped pay for everything, from my grandparents' retirement to Florida to the travel I did as a college student.
Push that top one over.
For Alicia and her own 3 kids, that kind of generational cushion just was not available.
There wasn't a whole lot planned for them.
Well, gang, that is part of the history that got to the point of, hey, we need fair housing laws. So I know some of us, not us as the professionals, but when we do these classes, even for the public, a lot of people are like, hey, but that's all ancient history, right? 1968 changed all of that, right? Well, I always like to say, take off your real estate hat, get out of real estate mode, and just think about laws in general, right? So I think about, if you've seen on Netflix, The Tinder Swindler, or if you've ever watched Dateline, or even the ID channel, a lot of these shows show us that just because there is a law doesn't mean people aren't going to violate it, doesn't mean people will get caught, doesn't even mean there will be a penalty, right? We know that, we understand that. So fair housing is no exception. Fair housing laws are fantastic. I'm so thankful we have them. But at the end of the day, that doesn't turn the switch. That doesn't just say, hey, fair housing is done here, no one will violate it. And if people do violate it, they're automatically caught. There's automatically a penalty. That's just not the way any law works. So with that being said, what's going on right now? Well, here's another chance for you to get more points for our prize at the end. Tell me, what year do you think this happened? Type in chat. So let me read it. It says a Kansas man, trying to talk fast because I want to make sure I get done in the hour, but a Kansas man has pleaded guilty to a federal hate crime after threatening a Black minor with a knife for being in a, quote, white town. The Department of Justice announced on Thursday that this person pleaded guilty in federal court to threatening the boy and interfering with his right to fair housing. Any guesses on when this happened? What year was this? Any thoughts? Woo, Joan, I wish this was 1975. John, 2021, Bill, 2020. I see it. Okay, so you all are right. And I do wish this was old. I wish this is something that was ancient history, but this was reported in February of 2022. And this is, again, this intimidation of not having access and opportunity to live in a home. Last summer, per the date that I've got circled, the CFPB just found fresh evidence of redlining, which really has been illegal now for half a century. Just in 2021, we also saw that the pink part that I have circled, that's how often steering was occurring. And that's been illegal as well. And notice those numbers. We've got a third, almost up to a half of percentage. Also, last year, you may have noticed some of these reports that kept cropping up in the news. And I've got just some of the screenshots that show how we have had to continue to use testers. So just like you saw in that last video where they had one homeowner that represented a protected class, in that case, Black, go look for a home. And then all of a sudden, we see that they, I'm sorry. Hold on, let me pause this. I have a dog and she just got upset. Hold on, I'm sorry. Let me get her to calm down. I'm I'm sorry, gang. We have not really had that happen in the 2 years that we've been doing these classes by Zoom. So please forgive my pup. She's a sweetie pie, but yeah. Anyway, hopefully while I got up, you got a chance to read some of these on the screen. But as I was saying, 1960s, we had testers, and that was a way to verify, hey, there is a disparity, there is discrimination happening. So unfortunately, here in 2022, 2021, 2020, we had to do the same thing when there were situations when people, in the attempt to get their home appraised, felt like, hey, I don't think this is fair market value. I think some homes in the neighborhood have gotten more. And lo and behold, when many of these families had a white friend, even their white realtor step in for them and pretend that it was their home, and they didn't stage the home differently other than removing any identifiers that represented race or whatever protected class it might be. Instantly, as you see on the screen, we've got appraisal increases. One was so drastic, it was almost $500,000, which should be mind-blowing that, again, these dates are just from last year. So again, I'm showing we've got some things still going on today. Oh, and John, you said my puppy should join us. I know. She probably would want to. She's a ham and will probably take over the screen. But anyway, I will mention, or actually, let's take a look at this bingo board. If we were in person, I would give everybody one and we'd try to go through and see who can get bingo. Now, the goal of this bingo game is to identify on this board which of these protected classes did not report a fair housing violation at all in the 2021 report. So it just came out a few weeks ago, but it was of 2020 data. Any guesses? And really, I guess for the sake of time, I won't do guesses. Let me just tell you, every single one of them was violated. Every single one. So disability, race, familial status, sex, national origin, color, religion, source of income, age, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, criminal background, domestic violence victims, military and veteran status, immigration status and citizenship, retaliation, arbitrary, marital status, student status, and there were more than these, but I wanted to put the ones that are most relevant in Rhode Island. Every last one of these, there was an infringement upon. This is now, y'all. So I know, I was even sharing with Linda how a lot of times we are good at what we do, right? And I'm sure many of you are not the violators, right? So it does feel like we get in this little bubble, but I want to challenge us to be advocates for fair housing, whether it's in our bubble, with our clients, with our vendor partners, or even in our community at large. I'll give you a couple of things to help with that. And I know our time is running down. So let me also just mention, so those stats that I just mentioned came from this report. And remarkably, it was over 28,000 reported violations in this report from 2021. That shouldn't be, if laws automatically, poof, bam, boom, made fair housing just instant. It doesn't, as I've shared already. Okay, with all of that being said, I'm checking the time. Let me just mention as a recap. So how did we get here and where are we today? Well, take a look at all of these things I have going on in the circle. So prior to 1968, and unfortunately, even now, we had and have steering, blockbusting, redlining, professional exclusion, as that video I showed from our association president, appraisal bias, forced, low or no compensated displacement, I didn't go through that for sake of time, but there's a lot out there regarding that. Denial of promised benefits, services, and funding. For example, the GI Bill created really America's middle class, but unfortunately, people of color were not able to get access to many of the GI Bill benefits, which included home loans, threats of violence, like the sundown town, like I mentioned from earlier this year, in February, lending bias, subprime loans, and discriminatory CC&Rs, which they're not enforceable, but as we mentioned, some of them are still in the documents today. Okay, with all of that being said, I have something I want to show you. And I'm just trying to think based on time. I wanted to also leave time for questions. So I'm going to skip a few things. Let's skip some things. Let's watch this quick clip just for some levity.
All right, everyone, we made it. My job is to help new homeowners who have turned into their parents.
I'm having a big lunch and then just a snack for dinner.
We're using a speakerphone in the store. Is that a good idea? One of the ways I do that is to get them out of the home. You're looking for a grout brush. Did he ask for your help? No.
This commercial, I think it's hilarious. There is nothing wrong, by the way, with turning into our parents, even though here Coach Rick is kind of helping them out. But one of the things that I wanted to point out from this commercial that hopefully you just find funny is that how he helps them identify their blind spots is simply by asking questions. Now, when I say blind spots, what am I referring to? Well, we all make associations, we do. And with our associations, they can be good, they can be neutral, right? Or they can create harm. For example, the National Fair Housing Alliance, as far as bias and appraisal, shared how these associations that actual appraisers have written, not just thought to themselves, but they wrote on appraisal reports, made the difference in what I shared when I got up, when my pup was barking, was the appraisal differences, right? So I'll just read the first one for the sake of time, but this is what an appraiser said. It said, and then up here, it's getting better because of all of the Mexican people moving out. There's an association being made there, and that association, particularly when it comes from appraisers, again, it leads to what I have on the screen. And that is, again, take a look at that first example. We've got a Black family. Their initial appraisal is for just under $1 million, which may sound decent until you know the fair market value. So the realtor, God bless her, she, as the person of a different protected class, which allowed them to do this test, she steps in, pretends like it's her home, poof, bam, boom, in a matter of days. This is not years later. In a matter of days, it's almost $500,000 appraisal increase. So our associations in housing, they do make a difference. Here's a few other associations that have been made. So we see one headline: landlords are less likely to reply to applicants with Black and Latino names. Or it even says, we've got a real estate agent said they didn't want a Middle Eastern buyer to purchase their home because they didn't want to support terrorists. And this was all in just 2021, a few months ago. These are associations being made. So it is up to us to recognize associations aren't bad, but they can either support fair housing or undermine fair housing. And I want to challenge all of us to not only make sure our own associations support and uplift fair housing, right? But all of our partners, right? So if we're working with a particular closing attorney or our home inspector or our preferred lenders, right? Our clients, we want to make sure that we are doing our part. Now, I know you're probably wondering, now, wait a minute, I don't want to get into a fist fight trying to tell somebody that they are not following fair housing. It's one thing for me to take onus for myself, right? But I've got something for you. I know, again, it can feel like, okay, that's muddy waters to get into. Let me give you some things that can help. And before I do, though, quickly, I have on the screen, some of us make explicit associations, others make implicit. Explicit is more of a deliberate stance, right? When someone says, I don't care that fair housing is law. I don't want people that get SSI checks to live here, which in the state of Rhode Island would be illegal to say, right? That's explicit. That's not what I'm referring to. That's when a penalty is needed. That's not us. We're talking about something different. We're talking more about that implicit association, right? Again, that's more of our blind spots or what's out of our awareness. I didn't realize that violates fair housing. And in those instances, we need more education or blind spotting, like we saw Coach Ritt do in the Progressive commercial. So questions, if you didn't know, they interrupt unconscious and implicit associations that we may be making. Again, this is different from that explicit stance of, I don't care that this is law. Do not step foot on my property. Very different. That's a penalties needed, and that should be reported. But we're talking about, again, our vendors, maybe our clients, maybe even ourselves, where we don't even realize that this acts against fair housing. So one of the best things to do, and this is a secret, y'all. I don't know why it's such a secret, but questions, this is really one of the biggest solutions. And I'm a coach who, unfortunately, but fortunately, I've spent thousands of dollars to go through coach trainings through the International Coaching Federation, which I'm a member of. And with all of this, the one thing that they always want us to focus on is asking powerful questions that help people come to a realization themselves. So some of the questions I have on the screen include, why don't I work in that neighborhood? Why was she turned down? What do you mean by that? How does this serve or disserve the community? Asking questions is one of the best things we can do. And so with that, I have this whole acronym, and it's called the Fair Housing Decoder, which is who we are, and I believe we should be. We are fair housing decoders. I've got 7 questions for that journey. I knew we wouldn't get to them. Like I said, it's from a 6-hour class. Let's just get to 2 or 3 of those questions. I've already mentioned some. But I will say, even though we're not going to get to all the questions, I don't want to leave you hanging here on the screen. And again, I can send the slide deck out to you along with a direct link. But here's a link to the full infographic of what it means to be a decoder. So each letter of the word decoder, again, it's an acronym, so it represents the type of questions we should be asking of ourselves, of our colleagues, of our vendor partners, and even our clients to ensure that fair housing is being activated, achieved, and it's at the forefront of what we're doing. So here's one, and I call for the D. I call this the dissed, like disrespected or dismissed. I feel like I'm showing my age when I say dissed. I know that is very much an 80s hip hop term, but anyway, dissed deactivator. And this is a question we would ask to someone who feels like, hey, my rights may have been infringed upon. So we can ask our clients, and we should, and I want us to do these questions proactively. It should never be that someone is having an issue and we just ignore it. Right. And I know that's not who any of you are anyway. I know you are proactive advocates for all of your clients. But here's this question. It says, you seem displeased. What rubs you the wrong way about this interaction or transaction? And again, I'm not focused just on our performance. because we know the real estate transaction has many pieces to it. So whether it was from the lender, whether it was from the seller, whether it was from whomever, we have an opportunity to ask a question. Also, I want to throw out there, we should be reporters, or at least facilitate reporting, right? So again, this is another question to those that may feel like their rights have been infringed upon. Would you like to make a report? I know that feels extremely simplistic, but let me tell you, this is not a question that is often asked. And there have been numerous reports that show, like this one from the National Fair Housing Alliance, that it's often difficult for our consumers, our clients, to even report and challenge problems throughout the transaction, including appraisals like I have here. Let me show you this quick video of one such instance.
Because I'll tell you, it was not easy. The appeal process was cumbersome. It was, I had to seek out advice from Amy because I'm not a real estate agent. I don't know this process. I don't know how it works. I just knew that we needed to fix it and I needed some help in how to navigate it. And she helped us navigate through that, answer the questions that they had. There was language in there. I didn't even know what it meant, but she helped us do that. And we got the appeal approved and the bank ordered a new appraisal on our home.
So hopefully with that, you see that, again, for us as professionals who do this every day, it's like, okay, yeah, just file a report. But for our clients, our consumers, it's just usually not that simple. And they need our proactive advocacy to help them. So as I mentioned, that decoder infographic that, thanks, Carol, for putting it in the chat. You all can take a look at that and see some of the other questions and other things. But I wanted to stop there. I know I've only left 3 minutes for questions, but I wanted to give an opportunity for questions.
Please unmute yourself. I think you have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. You don't have to type it in. Go ahead and chime in. Does anybody have a question for Dr. Lee? They're all being very shy, Dr. Lee.
No worries, no worries.
So any final comments you'd like to say? Oh, here's something. I think there was something here. Joan asked, what would you suggest as the first step to better understand fair housing?
Yeah, so the best thing, and I know I stopped sharing my screen because I just wanted to look in case anyone did want to ask a live question, but let me share my screen because as I mentioned, I know I only gave a quick snippet of some of the history, but I would really encourage you do some deeper dives. I shared just one video regarding fair housing in Rhode Island, but there's so much more. That particular video was from the Historical Society here in Rhode Island, but again, there's so much more. So let me quickly share my screen and give you some of those other resources to check out. Whoops, and you guys are seeing behind the curtain, but that's okay. Hold on. Okay. If you haven't already taken, and we'll start with what NAR offers, if you haven't taken the Fair Haven Fair Housing Simulation, which is on the left side of the screen, chef's kiss. I liked it a lot, particularly if you're someone that likes like the gaming interface, because it gives you an opportunity to understand more of what everyday unfair housing looks like for people, both the historical perspective and again, how it shows up today, because that's the part that even though, again, as great of a professional you are and you're not doing it, it's still happening, right? Then on the other side of the screen, I've got The Color of Law. This is a great historical book that goes through the entire nation, but in the index, you can go straight to Rhode Island and look at some of the challenges that really prevented fair housing. And also, we've got the Overcoming Barriers to Fair Housing Bias Override from NAR. So these are just a few things that I wanted to mention. And I also said there were winners and prizes. So everybody wins. Thank you all that participated in the chat, but I want to give this to everybody. And again, we'll send out if you guys want the link. But the book, and it's again, complimentary, How to Be an Anti-Racist Real Estate Pro. So it's going to go more in depth because, again, an hour is a great amount of time to get some good information, but there's so much more. So I hope, again, I piqued your interest. I'll stop sharing my screen. And that's that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. We really appreciated what you had to say today, what you had to offer, and your time. Suzanne, anything?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lee. Really enjoyed your presentation. And I want to thank all of the members who took time out of the busy days to join us here. We're pleased to join together as the 5 local associations to offer this program in memory or in honor of April Fair Housing Month. And let's not just treat the 30 days of April as Fair Housing Month. Let's make a commitment to make fair housing a 365-day part of our mission and our values as individuals and as practitioners.
Very well said, Suzanne. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lee. And I hope that we see you along the way in our travels with NAR. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.